Hey guys, Brian Bolin here. Today we're going to get into the church committee hearings. Not all these hearings were available to the public, but basically what we have is a few archival pieces of video footage as well as a final report that the church committee put out. So in 1975, the church committee headed by Frank Church looked into the abuses of the CIA. Now, this is very, very important in American history. And there's been times where a few years ago, around 2020, if you know what I'm talking about, you could go on Google and other places like that, search engines. And if you try to type in Operation Mockingbird, it would tell you that it's not real, that it never happened. So for me, it's really important. I don't know about you guys, but it's really important to get into the actual documents, the actual archival video footage, so that we can really make a bigger point on what truth actually is and what it means to the fabric of society, so that we have a better foundation on what reality actually is. Because the social engineers that are running the planet right now, the corporatocracy, the people in politics, the people above politics, they're looking at us like sheep. And it's time we start getting clear on what previous abuses of power look like so that we know what to look out for in the future. All right, so without further ado, let's get right into this. Today we're going to be watching the CIA director William Colby's testimony in Congress. Let's check it out.
United States. Subject today concerns CIA's involvement in the development of bacteriological warfare materials with the Army's biological laboratory at Fort Detrick, CIA's retention of an amount of shellfish toxin, and CIA's use and investigation of various chemicals and drugs. The relationship between the CIA and the Army Biological Laboratory at Fort Detrick as an activity requiring further investigation surfaced in late April of this year. It resulted from information provided by a CIA officer not directly associated with the project in response to my repeated directives that all past activities which might now be considered questionable be brought to the attention of agency management. Information provided by him and by two other officers aware of the project indicated that the project at Fort Detrick involved the development of bacteriological warfare agents, some lethal, and associated delivery systems suitable for clandestine use. A search was made for any records or other information.
So I just want to say, Fort Detrick, for any of you guys who haven't heard about this place comes up constantly in whistleblower testimony. I'm a big fan of going to the source, not just like hearing someone else, a third party, talk about it in a random article online, someone you've never met or anything. I want to see the source. I want to see the actual whistleblower. I want to see them and their testimony and make my own opinion about it. We need to get better as a society of looking at the foundational facts of where information originates from. And that's what I'm trying to do in this video. Let's keep going.
Information available on the project. This search produced information about the basic agreement between the Army and the CIA relating to the project and some limited records covering its activities from its beginning in 1952 to its termination in 1970. In the course of the investigation, CIA's laboratory storage facilities were searched, and about 11 grams, a little less than half an ounce, of shellfish toxin and 8 milligrams of cobra venom were discovered in a little-used, vaulted storeroom in an agency building.
So a lot of people know about this this gun that had a shellfish toxin in it. From what I understand, the whole point of it was so that they could go out and do covert assassinations where it wouldn't come up in the autopsy. But this aspect of it also having cobra venom in it is extremely interesting, because you have Dr. Brian Ardis, who is a very interesting fellow. I follow what he does. I'm not 100% convinced in everything he says, but he did mention something very interesting, that a lot of pharmaceuticals are made with cobra venom and other types of venom, which is very interesting. Look further into that on your own. Also, the origination of the GL1P studies, so drugs like Wegovy, Ozempic, those kind of drugs, were originally tested with the venom of what's called a Gila monster, which is a huge lizard. So it comes from this snake venom, essentially. So I thought this was really interesting the first time I heard this testimony. So this is an interesting validation that the CIA, more also other three-letter agencies, are most likely utilizing this toxin some way, somehow. This is something to look into deeper, and have been since at least this time period, 1975. But these hearings are talking about the CIA abuses dating all the way back to 1940s and 50s. So let's keep going in the video.
A major early requirement of the agency was to find a replacement for the standard cyanide L pill issued to agents in hazardous situations during World War II. This was the basis on which eventually we discovered the shellfish toxin. The only application of this toxin was in the U-2 flight over the USSR in May 1960, during which Gary Powers carried such a device concealed in a silver dollar. In the Powers case, the grooves of the drill were filled with shellfish toxin. He obviously did not use it and was not instructed to do so. It was offered to him to provide him with an option. The Powers flight was the only time we are aware that the toxin was provided for operational use, although the L pill was made available for earlier flights. The primary agency interest was in the development of dissemination devices to be used with standard chemicals off the shelf. Various dissemination devices, such as a fountain pen dart launcher and an engine head bolt designed to release when heat, appeared to be peculiarly suited for clandestine use. Available records do not indicate that all specific items were developed exclusively for the CIA, as work on similar devices was also done for the Army. At the time the toxin was found, the officer responsible for the project in 1970 stated that he had no recollection as to how it got there. On the 30th of June, discussions were held with a retired agency officer who had provided the initial lead. This man, who had been the GS-15 branch chief in 1970, stated that the toxin had in fact been moved from Fort Detrick and stored in the laboratory. This was done on the basis of his own decision after... I
don't know about you guys, but that's making me think of MK Ultra right there, which is another part of the church committee hearings. But let's go back to this part and kind of re-listen to what he says here. He says that the person he's talking about at Fort Detrick had no knowledge of how it got there, but he says it in a very peculiar way, where part of MK Ultra was essentially mind control experiments, where they were taking science from Nazi scientists, essentially from Mengele, Joseph Mengele's work in the Nazi concentration camps, and where he was working on wild experiments. But I'm not sure if it started with Mengele or part of his research that was unfinished and the CIA started using, but it's essentially trauma-based mind control is what it is, where you traumatize the subject enough to where it sort of honeycombs the mind to put them into a DID state, dissociative identity disorder state, where they essentially have multiple personalities that can be programmed through hypnosis to carry out certain activities or tasks. One of these tasks that came up in the hearings were essentially to be a Manchurian candidate, to go out and do covert assassins, where after the assassination was done, the subject would have no memory of even doing the assassination. So this is very interesting what he's saying here. I'm not sure if it's MK Ultra related, but I mean, this is a time period where the CIA was doing everything without accountability, so who knows?
Exclusively for the CIA, as work on similar devices was also done for the Army.
There we go.
At the time the toxin was found, the officer responsible for the project in 1970 stated that he had no recollection as to how it got there. On the 30th of June, discussions were held with a retired agency officer who had provided the initial lead. This man, who had been the GS-15 branch chief in 1970, stated that the toxin had in fact been moved from Fort Detrick and stored in the laboratory. This was done on the basis of his own decision after conversations with the responsible project officer. He further stated that he made this decision based on the fact that the cost and difficulty of isolating the shellfish toxin were so great that it simply made no sense to destroy it, particularly when there would be no future source of such toxin. The current branch chief believes this explanation is correct, but still does not recall the actual act of receiving the material from Fort Detrick.
Now, that's very odd.
Both of these middle grade officers agree that no...
I mean, this is a sensitive material. You know, either they're lying so that there won't be any accountability, but to have no recollection of it actually arriving at Fort Detrick, I mean, this is it doesn't make any sense. Well, let's keep going.
No one, including their immediate superior, was told of the retention of the shellfish toxin.
If that amount of shellfish toxin were administered orally, which is one of the least efficient ways for administering it in terms of its lethality, that quantity was sufficient to kill at least 14,000 people.
That's a lot.
If it were
I love the camera zoom right there. The dramatic zoom.
Equipment that was found in the laboratory, that quantity would be sufficient to kill a great many more. Estimates vary upwards into the hundreds of thousands. Now,
there he is, the OG, Frank Church.
My first question is, why did the agency prepare a shellfish toxin for which there is no practical antidote, which attacks the nervous system and brings on death very quickly? Why did the agency prepare toxins of this character in quantities sufficient to kill many thousands of people? What was the need for that in the first place, long before the presidential order came down to destroy this material?
I think the first...
I'll tell you why, covert assassinations.
That question, Mr. Chairman, is the fact that the L pill, which was developed during World War II,
so here's the rationale.
Some time to work, and
the rationalization,
agonizing to the subject who uses it.
So from what I can understand, this L pill he's talking about sounds basically like a cyanide pill. He said there was cyanide in the L pill, but it takes a long time to work. And now he's explaining that the whole point of doing this whole shellfish toxin with the snake venom, the cobra venom, was to make it less agonizing and less painful for the subject dying. Thoughtful people, these CIA. Thoughtful people.
Some of the people who would be natural requesters of such a capability for their own protection and the protection of their fellow agents really would not want to face that kind of a fate. But if they could be given an instantaneous one, they would accept that. And that was the thought process.
What a thoughtful man.
The capability. Now, I cannot explain why that quantity was developed, except that this was a collaboration that we were engaged in with the United States Army. And we did develop this particular weapon, you might say, as a for possible use. When CIA retained the amount that it did, it obviously did it improperly.
This quantity and the various devices for administering the toxin that were found in the laboratory certainly make it clear that purely defensive uses were not what the agency was limited to in any way. There were definite offensive uses. In fact, there were dart guns. You mentioned suicide.
All right, let's pick up from right here.
Make it clear that purely defensive uses were not what the agency was limited to in any way. There were definite offensive uses. In fact, there were dart guns. You mentioned suicides. Well, I don't think a suicide is usually accomplished with a dart, particularly a gun that can place the dart in a human target in such a way that he doesn't even know that he's been hit.
There's no question about it. It was also for offensive reasons. No question.
Have you brought with you some of those devices which would have enabled the CIA to use this poison for?
We have indeed.
For killing people?
Here we go. Here it is.
Don't point it at me. I wonder if
Can you roll that over?
Now, does this pistol fire the dart?
Yes, it does, Mr. Chairman. The round thing at the top is obviously the sight. The rest of it is what is practically a normal 45, although it's special. However, it works by electricity. There's a battery in the handle, and it fires a small dart.
So that when it fires silently?
Almost silently, yes. Very little.
What range does it have?
100 meters.
That's wild.
100 meters, I believe, about 100 yards, 100 meters.
About 100 meters range.
Right.
And the dart itself, when it strikes the target...
That's absolutely bonkers.
Does the target know that he's been hit and about to die?
That depends, Mr. Chairman, on the particular dart used. There are different kinds of these flechettes that were used in various weapon systems, and a special one was developed which potentially would be able to enter the target without perception.
Without perception?
Right.
And did you find such darts in the library, in the laboratory?
We did.
Yes. Isn't it true too that the effort not only involved designing a gun that could strike a human target without knowledge of the person who'd been struck, but also the toxin itself would not appear in the autopsy?
Well,
this is
there
crucial.
Was an
or the dart?
Yes, so that there was no way of perceiving that the target was hit.
As a murder instrument, that's about as efficient as you can get, isn't it?
It is a weapon, a very serious weapon.
This record seems to disclose an additional concession, namely the lack of accountability, so that we not only have a secret agency, but we have an agency about which there's some question as to its accountability to the authority of the President or to the authority of the National Security Council.
This is
the record seems to disclose
absolutely crucial what they're getting at right now.
Presidential or Security Council order in the first place directing the CIA to establish this program at all. Secondly, there appears to be no report by the CIA to higher authority of the existence of these toxins or biological weapons. Thirdly, there seems to be no evidence that those in charge of the CIA inquired of subordinates as to the existence of toxins or biological weapons, or that following the presidential order decreeing the destruction of such toxins, that any formal order went forth within the CIA to require their destruction. Moreover, the record seems to support the notion that it was only by chance that the leadership of the CIA became aware some years later of even the existence of these lethal toxins, which were in violation of a direct presidential order.
Okay, so when I first watched this video, this part just blew my mind. So I'm watching this and I'm thinking to myself, I know what they're referring to. I know why they don't know. And it's because I've actually looked at the National Security Act of 1947, where it's very clear, where it gives explicit control. Well, it's actually not very clear, but basically it gives explicit control to for the creation of the CIA to have essentially no one overseeing them, really. They say they report to the National Security Council and the president from time to time, basically. But it's worded so vaguely, and that's kind of what he's getting at right now, that some of these congressmen apparently didn't even know that the CIA existed. And so he's saying, like, who do you actually answer to in this? Well, I'm going to show you guys the actual excerpt from the National Security Act, so you can see it with your own eyes, because this is what we do here. We read the documents. We read it exactly from the horse's mouth. There we go. Okay. There it is right there. So this is a report from the church committee hearings. And here they're highlighting the section. So it's section 102D, 4 and 5 of the Act, which authorizes the agency to perform the benefit of existing agencies such additional services of common concern as the National Security Council determines can be more efficiently accomplished centrally. 5, to perform such other functions, duties related to intelligence affecting the national security as the National Security Council may from time to time. So they're saying from time to time, we might need to inform the National Security Council, but it's like up to our discretion, essentially. So it's worded so vaguely that they're basically saying they can do anything that they want in the name of national security, which is absolutely ridiculous. And this is the reason why Frank Church said, we got to investigate this. We have to look into this. And I'm so happy that they did. And this is a huge part of American history that we need to get clearer on. All right, let's get back to the video here.
In short, the record's a mess, and we may never know just exactly what happened.
No one has interviewed Gottlieb as to why he destroyed the material or what they contained, the records.
No, we have not interviewed him as to the reason.
Do you know what documents he destroyed?
We're very unsure as to the total. We do not have an inventory of them.
Do you think they might have said who it was authorized the formulation or the retention of this stuff? Do you have any reason to think it might or might not contain that information?
In this case, I doubt that it would have very much, because this case indicates, from the evidence we have at hand.
Does it say anything, have any reason to think that it might say how, if at all, this material was used in an aggressive way against someone to kill someone?
Well, there may well be.
And I want to know too.
When was the documentation destroyed?
In short, the record's a mess, and we may never know just exactly what happened.
No one has interviewed Gottlieb as to why he destroyed the material or what they contained, the records.
No, we have not interviewed him as to the reason.
Do you know what documents he destroyed?
We're very unsure as to the total. We do not have an inventory of them.
Do you think they might have said who it was authorized the formulation or the retention of this stuff? Do you have any reason to think it might or might not contain that information?
In this case, I doubt that it would have very much, because this case indicates, from the evidence we have at hand.
Does it say anything, have any reason to think that it might say how, if at all, this material was used in an aggressive way against someone to kill someone?
Well, there may well be some of that.
When was the documentation destroyed?
In 1973.
It didn't happen to be destroyed at the same time those tapes.
1972. 1972.
1972. When in 1972?
In November, I believe it was.
In November of 72. Do you have any idea what volume of records
He's been
were
such a
destroyed?
good Boy Scout.
I do not know.
Do you know who authorized the destruction, if anyone?
As I said, there was a memorandum of agreement between the director and Mr. Gottlieb at that time.
And the director at that time was?
Mr. Helm.
Just happened
Mr. Helms is here in
to
this room.
destroy
Chairman,
the
I take it
evidence
we'll have an opportunity to hear from him
Mr. Helms will
today.
be,
a few years before the hearings.
tomorrow morning's
It's
hearings.
almost
I
like
believe he's
they
lead
got
on.
word from a little birdie that this might happen.
I won't prolong my opportunity to examine the witness much longer, Mr. Chairman. I understand we're going to try to operate under the 10-minute rule. May I ask you only this other question then in general, Mr. Colby? You've heard of the doctrine of plausible deniability.
Yes, and I've rejected it now, Senator. I say that we cannot depend upon that anymore.
I feel
The
like
question I was going to put to you, is that a phrase of art?
they
in the
basically
intelligence
created that.
community? Does it have a separate significance that you understand?
It was a rationale used in earlier years.
What does it
if
mean?
the United States could deny something and not be clearly demonstrated as
I think we all know the doctrine is deny
then
everything.
the United States could do so.
In the case of assassinations, in the case of any other of domestic surveillance, in the case of the formulation of poisons, under that previous rationale, would the doctrine of plausible deniability have led the agency to destroy records, to conceal evidence, or to compartmentalize?
He's hitting
to the
him
point where
hard.
it would
Get
be
him.
a committee such as this later would have been unable to establish what really happened?
I think the plausible denial concept was used in the sense of international diplomatic relationships. That
Are you
our
saying by
country,
that it would not have applied to the formulation of toxic materials?
I would not say that it didn't have anything to do with it at all, but I think that the basic rationale for the doctrine of plausible denial was so that our nation could deny something and not be tagged with it.
Colby, can
Our
you be
absolutely
absolutely sure
rationale, but he
there aren't
means
other
the CIA.
vaults
We all
containing
know.
poison somewhere in this town or in this country or in our possession in some part of the world?
I can't be absolutely sure, no, Senator. We obviously are conducting such investigations and have issued such orders as are possible, but I cannot be absolutely sure that some officer somewhere has not sequestered something.
Could you, as concisely as possible, state for the committee your understanding of the practice of compartmentalization?
Precisely as possible.
Compartmentation practice is merely the strict application of the need.
So just to be clear, now we refer to this as compartmentalization. It's very important. It's the way that these three-letter agencies work so that not every tier or scientist or whoever's working on certain projects knows exactly what they're working on. It's very important to the secrecy of these organizations, especially when we get into special access programs, which are basically, and then there's unacknowledged special access programs, which are now coming out in the UAP hearings in 2024, 2025, showing that there are programs that are above top secret on a need-to-know basis. So it's very interesting. So now we're hearing it from the horse's mouth, William Colby, CIA director, 1975, of the baseline foundation of how these projects work.
To know principle. If an employee in the intelligence business needs to know something in order to do his job, then he has a right to the information. But if he does not need to know that particular information, he does not have a right to the information. And if the information is one which is...
He's telling him right now, you do not have a need to know.
Which is required for large numbers of employees, well, then large numbers of employees will be allowed to know it. If the particular activity is a very sensitive matter and only a very few employees need to know it, then it will be known to only a very few employees. We make a particular effort to keep the identities of our sources and some of our more complicated technical systems restricted very sharply to the people who actually need to work on them, and many of the rest of the people in the agency know nothing about them.
So this is how the Manhattan Project was kept a secret so well. And people always say, how could there be a conspiracy this big on this level of this many people involved in the conspiracy? It's like, well, here's William Colby explaining how it works in the CIA. And then we also have the Manhattan Project. Let's see, how many people kept this secret on the Manhattan Project? How many people were involved in the Manhattan Project? 600,000. Oh, here we go. Here's this word again. Their work was highly compartmentalized and secretive, aware that they were contributing to a top secret war effort. So this is very interesting. People that worked at Los Alamos and the Manhattan Project. Okay, let's get back to the video.
Does that need-to-know principle apply in cases of sensitivity to the Director of Central Intelligence?
Certainly not. It does not, with one exception. I do not believe I need to know the name of an agent in some foreign country who's serving us at the risk of his life. I know he's there. I know what kind of a person he is, but I do not need to know his actual name, and I have kept that out of my knowledge because I travel and I don't want to know that kind of thing. That's the only area.
That's interesting.
I would apply to. I am responsible for everything that happens in the agency. I need to know everything that happens in the agency.
We've spoken rather extensively here about apparent lack of clear lines of
So I do think it's odd that the CIA director, for all the information of all the CIA's activities to go through him, and also I'm assuming get signed off by him, and he's explained that he needs to be aware of all the goings on of any projects or operations going on, but he's just saying no matter what, I don't want to know the names. It's very interesting to hear him say that in that way.
Already running downward and commensurate clear lines of responsibility and accountability running upward. To the best of your knowledge,
it's almost like it's like running the agency through, like sticking your head in the sand and being like, I only need to know what I need to know. It's like it's almost like he wants compartmentalization to a certain extent as well. It's very interesting. Probably so that when he's in these kind of hearings, he can honestly say what he needs to say versus what he shouldn't say or doesn't have to say. It's very interesting. But also that is the way that FOIA works as well, where let's say you have a declassified document that's heavily redacted in the Freedom of Information Act. Most of the things redacted, blacked out in the text, will be certain names, a lot of times it's names, maybe certain facilities. It just depends on if it still needs to be considered top secret kind of a thing, or still needs to be redacted to protect confidentiality of certain people. So it is interesting that, FOIA works in that way, in a similar way.
has there been any pervasive non-compliance in the matter of orders from directives from the President or orders from the DCI on the part of subordinates? In other words, has this reached a greater proportion than might even have been revealed here as a result of our discovery of a very, I think, significant instance of insubordination? If indeed it has been pervasive, isn't there a need for much tighter controls at the top?
Senator Tower, I believe that
Indeed.
We are really, we have in CIA a very tight discipline. I'm not saying it's total, obviously. It did not work in this case. But I think with people scattered around the world doing very sensitive work, doing highly compartmented work, there has been indeed a very high sense of discipline in the organization and a high sense of compliance to the regulations and the rules and the directives of the organization. And I think that the leadership of the organization has always felt very much subject to direct presidential control and responsive to it.
So you would say actually that this incident is an exception to the rule, that ordinarily the discipline has been good, that the control has worked and the accountability has worked in the way that it should according to proper cardinals of good administration.
In the business in which we are in, the intelligence and covert operations, I think there have been very few cases in which the agency has, or its employees have done something that they should not have. And in many of the cases which we now question, we find that those
except the ones we destroyed before this hearing
by the appropriate authorities at that time, that the sense of discipline within the organization seemed to be quite tight.
Senator Goldwater.
Like the discipline of destroying evidence before said hearing. All right, let's keep it going.
Mr. Chairman, I only have one question, Mr. Colby, but I have a short statement I'd like to make to you. Criticism and analysis are important ingredients in making our democracy
Go,
work.
Barry. See
However,
what you
we
got.
are now approaching the point where both are being abused to the point of self-destruction. I submit we must get out of the morass of doubt and pessimism into which we have sunk. We must not let the quarrels of the past interfere with building for the future. A tidal wave of criticism has swept over the intelligence community of our country, much of which is mistaken or unwarranted. The damage is severe.
Unwarranted influence.
If continued, its survival is uncertain. Before this committee have appeared men of the CIA, both on active duty and retired. All have been impressive because...
I just want to say, I feel like everyone speaks so eloquently, from like the 20s, 30s, 40s, all the way up to 1975. Everyone just speaks so eloquently. It's just beautiful. I love it.
...of the dedication and loyalty. Nothing we have heard detracts from the reputation of the CIA as a highly competent organization. The men and women of the CIA are doing a great job under very trying conditions. And I say to them, as our nation gets back on course, I believe there will be change for the better, and ask you to hold on.
Great job with all the misuse of power. Great job. Keep doing what you're doing. Come on, Barry.
Until that happens. You are never more needed by this country than right now, and as one American, I'm proud of you. To those young people who may be looking for careers and who...
It's interesting. You would never hear anybody say something like that in 2025 in a congressional hearing. I feel like, I'm proud of you. Keep doing what you're doing. But, it's 1975. Before this time period, there was still a lot more trust in government. So saying stuff like that was quite common. Times have really changed.
Have a desire for public service, I can think of no better way to serve your nation than as an intelligence officer. Many skills are required to keep the CIA a useful and productive organization.
Look at these guys. Come on, Barry. Come on, buddy.
Now, Mr. Colby.
Senator Goldwater, if I may, on behalf of our employees, thank you for that statement. They are under a lot of pressure these days, and they will appreciate that.
Under a lot of pressure with these hearings these days.
Have other countries developed bacterial warfare
They're still destroying evidence,
Senator,
burning shit in the back.
That is one aspect of bacteriological warfare that the President's directive in 1969 and 70 tells CIA to continue, and that is to follow the activities of other nations. That we will see the capabilities and activities of other nations in this field. And we have some officers who do follow these activities abroad, and they are quite general. There are some very dubious areas where we're just not sure of what the actual capabilities are in some respects. But we do follow it indeed, and there is extensive effort done by other nations in this line.
But you are now prevented from...
No, we can follow the foreign ones. That is no problem with that.
But can you do anything to offset them?
Well, I think the defense against those possible things is a matter for the Department of Defense, Senator.
You feel you're safe in that field?
Well, I think in collaboration with the Department of Defense and advising the Department of Defense of foreign developments in this area, we are giving them the basis for developing such defensive efforts as we need.
Thank you. That's all I had, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Goldwater. Senator Morgan.
See, with everything that he's saying that they're spending to a positive, you have to look through the lens of social engineering. You have to look through the lens of... part of these hearings show that they were organizing coups, essentially, and assassinating people to put people they wanted in power. So you only do that when you're when you have an agenda to really put your cards in order to be more in control of the world. When you do things like that. So we have to look through the lens of like, they're not just being patriotic Americans and keep doing what you're doing, sir. We have to look through the lens of like, these are insidious people that will do anything to kill people. Don't forget about the 14,000, whatever they're talking about with the shellfish. Like it could kill up to the dart gun, right? The cobra venom and the shellfish toxin could kill up to 14,000 people. They have an insidious agenda. I think now in 2025, we're not as blinded by the mask and the lens of patriotism. Unfortunately, like Barry Goldwater is kind of propping them up here, saying, good job, guys. Keep doing what you're doing. I think now even people who aren't as educated on these type of subjects, we see through the bullshit. We see through the lies. And we don't want to continue to be lied to anymore. But we will only be cognizant of when we're being lied to if we see through the lens of social engineering, of what these psychological operations are doing to our minds and how they're shaping our worldview if we're not careful. All right, let's get back to the video.
Chairman, Mr. Colby, since this is the first public hearing of this committee, I think we should note that we feel, and I certainly feel, that the role played by the Central Intelligence Agency is a very vital one and a very important one. I think the fact that you quoted from President Kennedy, who said that quite often our failures are trumpeted and our successes go unheralded, is
well, this didn't age well.
Here. This committee has been told by...
It's like, sorry, I think in 2025, we all kind of know the CIA probably had some involvement in Kennedy's assassination. Just saying, most likely.
Witnesses that had the Central Intelligence Agency existed prior to World War II.
I mean, don't forget, Kennedy did say he wanted to smash the CIA into a million pieces. Quote along those lines.
Pearl Harbor might never have happened. Or if it had happened, the loss of and deaths and property might have been much less. So I want you to know that we do recognize the role of the Central Intelligence Agency. We recognize the fact that we in this country must be able to know in advance what our potential adversaries and potential enemies may be planning so that we can cope with them.
So I want to say something very interesting that you might not be expecting here right now. But they're talking about potential adversaries. They're bringing up Pearl Harbor. From that, you can even think about Project for a New American Century memos that came out right before 9/11, where they're saying that we need a new Pearl Harbor to justify the new bringing in of the police state post 2001. If you haven't seen that, go look into it on your own. Maybe I'll make a video about it later. But something that's really important that they're not going to get into in these hearings, but I want to cover it here. These enemies that they're talking about, I don't know if this is intentional or not intentional, but it's always appeared to me that the CIA was created as a response to something, okay? I haven't heard other researchers or anyone else talk about this, but it's something that I've been looking at for about 10 years. And I feel like intuitionally there has to be some kind of connection here. Roswell, didn't see me going here, did you? Roswell happened in early July 1947. National Security Act goes through 2 weeks after Roswell. And a new 3-letter agency is created as a result of the National Security Act, thus being the CIA. In the documents, it says it's to take over the CIG position of what they were doing in that time period. In my own research of it, of the rushing of like kind of putting the CIA in this document, seemed to be rushed in a bit last minute, because apparently they were working on the National Security Act for a few years, from what I understand. And the CIA being put in was added very late in the game, very quickly, very rushed. So there could be some kind of connection there. I'm just going to throw that out. Not conclusive, but 2 weeks after Roswell. 2 weeks. Just keep that in mind. Let's keep going.
So I do think that it is important. I believe, Mr. Colby, most of the questions have been asked, except that earlier the reference was made to the presidential order, and we alluded to what was, in fact, I think, the press release concerning the presidential order. But as I read the presidential order, I find that this statement, United States bacteriological and biological programs will be confined to research and development.
United States, that was a very interesting kind of Freudian slip there, because it almost is like we're in some type of, it's like we work till we die kind of thing. We work for the corporatocracy. There's this whole concept that we are a corporation, that the United States is a corporation. So it's very interesting how he said that there. I don't know if that was on purpose or not, or Freudian slip, but this guy's saying some interesting things here that, like, if you're not paying attention, it's going to go right over your head. And he hasn't even gotten into the real crux of what he's about to say yet.
For defensive purposes, immunization, safety measures, etc. This does not preclude research into those offensive aspects of bacteriological, biological agents necessary to determine what defensive measures are required. Now, earlier you stated you thought it might have been the mentality of those who made the decision to keep these toxins, that they might be needed in order to develop defensive weapons. Do you think, if that was their thinking, that it would be in keeping with the presidential order?
Rationale.
I just read it to you.
Well, we looked at that. I think that you might be able to make a case for that, Senator, if you were actively involved and had responsibilities for these defensive measures. But as I think the chairman pointed out, the quantities maintained by CIA are difficult to defend under that directive.
What was your position with the CIA at that time, Mr. Colby?
In 1970, I was on detached service. I was assigned to the Department of State in Vietnam.
Then you had nothing to do with retaining these toxins?
No, I had nothing.
And you knew nothing about them until you made the
Until we discovered it in May.
I would commend you, Mr. Colby, again, for taking these steps to determine what has happened. I think most men in the CIA, as well as those in the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, are dedicated public officials and want to do what is right. And I think your method of asking for any known violations has been helpful to this committee, and I would commend it, Mr. Chairman, to the Internal Revenue Service, to the end that they might ask their field agents if they know of known violations in this area, and I would commend it also to the Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Senator Goldwater mentioned, and I believe the presidential order directed the CIA to continue to maintain surveillance of the bacteriological and biological warfare capabilities of other states. You say you have done that.
We do so, yes, Senator.
Are you in a position to tell this committee whether or not other states, and especially potential adversaries or enemies, now have stockpiles of such toxins?
I don't think I can say much about stockpiles, but I do know that there are installations which appear to us to be experimental stations of some sort.
Thank you, Mr. Colby.
In the chemical field, certainly there are stockpiles. We are aware of that also.
Makes sense.
I have no further questions. Thank you, Senator. Senator Mathias.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Colby, some of America's greatest victories and some of America's greatest defeats have represented failures of intelligence. Trenton and Antietam.
This guy's going to go in hard, I bet. Watch.
I think all illustrate the vital necessity of intelligence. A year ago, just almost exactly a year ago, when Senator Mansfield and I introduced the legislation which has resulted in this investigation, we had that very much in mind. We wanted to be sure that we had the best intelligence system which was available. But I think we also had in mind John Adams' warning that a frequent recurrence to the principles of the Constitution is absolutely necessary to preserve the advantages of liberty and to maintain a free government.
Agreed.
I think the discovery of this toxin raises some interesting questions which
Get him, Charles.
the purview of this investigation and which I think have to be answered before this committee completes its work and makes its recommendations to the Congress. For example, I accept your statement that this toxin was never used, except in the one instance that you've described.
He accepts, but does he believe that? Do we believe that?
Ask you this. If you had used the toxin, what provision of the Constitution would have afforded authority to do so?
Well, I think CIA's operations certainly overseas operations. They fall under the National Security Act of 1947, and they fall consequently under the provisions of the Constitution that call for the national defense and the foreign relations of the United States.
Vaguely.
But the use of a toxin of this sort is, of course, a use of force, wouldn't you agree?
It's a weapon.
It's a weapon. Yes. It's a use of force. And normally, if force is to be employed against another nation, congressional approval is required.
It's like an act of war.
Well, I think
he's talking about.
Now in the midst of the War Powers Act, Senator, and this activity, of course, preceded that.
Yes, it did precede it. But
nice little sidestep, Colby. Okay, one for Colby.
And
then we're at one for Charles.
The use of force in the relations of the United States with other powers in the world, or at least the potential use of force, as you say, it's never been used in this instance, which differs only in degree from covert operations in Laos or other examples that we could think of. And so it seems to me that the discovery of this toxin raises very fundamental questions about the relationship to the covert activities of any intelligence agency, be it the CIA or the FBI or others, with the constitutional process by which this government is conducted. And I would think, Mr. Chairman, that there is no responsibility greater upon us than to define that relationship as accurately as possible before the close of these hearings. Thank you.
It is, of course, contained within the amendment to the Foreign Assistance Act passed last December, which now requires that any activity of CIA other than intelligence gathering abroad shall be found to be important to the national security by the President and shall be reported to the appropriate committees, and that includes 6 committees of the Congress at this time. This is a statutory provision which we are in compliance with.
And let me say, Mr. Colby, I agree with you. Let me say that this imposes responsibilities on the Congress that I don't think we've always discharged very well. I can recall members of Congress who recoiled from responsibility of knowing what was happening. Members of Congress who said, "Don't tell me, I don't want to know." I think that is an indictment of the Congress, just as severe as any indictment which is labeled against any of the intelligence community.
I wouldn't call it an indictment of the Congress, Senator. I think it rather reflected the general atmosphere and political atmosphere toward intelligence that was the traditional approach, and I think we Americans are changing that, and this act is an example of that change, as is this committee.
I think you're more generous than I'm inclined to be. I can't be that permissive. I don't think climate will excuse what is really a dereliction of duty, and if there had not been that dereliction of duty, perhaps we wouldn't be here today.
I must say, Senator Mathias, that I agree.
The climate of it constitutes the dereliction of duty. Got it. So, there's a few things I want to go over here real quick, okay? So, the CIA was created by the 1947 National Security Act, right? Let's go over a few of these things. So, it was worded so vaguely that it did not define what intelligence activities meant. It didn't define limits. It didn't clearly establish who the CIA was accountable to. So this ambiguity is exactly what allowed the CIA to justify covert action, psychological operations, and domestic surveillance without explicit authorization. Even though they've been held accountable for this, I think it's obvious that they're still doing this today. They found ways to sidestep the new laws and provisions that were put in place for this so that they can have some type of oversight. But now they do things that aren't privy to the Freedom of Information Act. They work with these outside contractors, especially when it comes to the special access programs. We've now learned that if third-party companies or private contractors are working with three-letter agency organizations, because they're private, they're not privy to the Freedom of Information Act. So it's a very interesting loophole that allows them to continue to get away with everything that they're doing. There's also other methods that they have, but that one to me is the one that we need to have another 1975 style hearing in 2025 on this.
We have been victimized by excessive secrecy, not only with respect to the failure of the Congress in the past to exercise proper surveillance over intelligence activities, but also excessive secrecy has created this kind of mischief within the executive branch. Here we have a case where the very methods of secrecy concealed for 5 years an act of insubordination within the CIA that came to light only by the happenstance that Mr. Colby, the present director, asked the agency if they please wouldn't tell him what's been going on that's wrong. And as a result, somebody, knowing something about this, gave him a tip, as a result of which he then conducted an investigation that led to these disclosures. So I believe that the internal workings within the agency itself are a matter that we must look at very closely to be sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen again if it can be prevented. Excessive secrecy may have victimized this agency as well as the Congress.
Okay, guys, that's it. Well, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. Subscribe if you want to see more conspiracy content like this. I'll be here exposing more social engineering, more CIA abuses of power, and other interesting conspiracy topics. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.